Hello, everyone. My name is Nora Rochelle. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the Astro Priestesses Summit for 2025 and beyond. I am here with beautiful Ashley Scott and Cameron Allen, and I asked them to come together specifically because they just have so much gorgeous alchemy together. And their talk is going to be on the synergy between the masculine and feminine. And I think that is so relevant and so important and quite rare to see the conversations happening represented from both sides. So I'm really looking forward to diving into that. First, I'll share a little bit about them. I was so lucky and blessed to be able to meet you both in person at Cosme in Tucson, which I really loved. And it's like everybody says, the hugs from both of you. I mean, Cameron, your hugs had preceded you. Like people from Astrology Hub were telling me about your hugs before I met you in person. So I was like already getting myself ready. And then you too, Ashley, you both have it. You both give the most magical hugs. And I really think that that's probably one of the highest ways to explain what you do. But both of you are so rooted in medical intuition, medical astrology, herbalism, yoga, and really all of those beautiful integrative modalities that help us to harmonize body, mind, and spirit. And so there's a million more things I could say, but I'd love for you to both to just share what do you want people to know about you?
Yeah, so I'd like to just start with I'm a medical astrologer, evolutionary astrologer, traditional astrologer, just weaving those things in together, so that thing that could be concrete astrology, that could be emotional, psychological, past life astrology, and it also can be having to do with the health. And a lot of times those things are synthesized together with my studies in Ayurveda, my studies in yoga, my studies in movement, my health and sports science degree, being a athlete and in college, and just how those things all come together to make a holistic unity. And I would just keep it at that for now.
Beautiful. So I am a shamanic practitioner. I am a sacral embodiment coach and womb practitioner. So a lot of my work is gearing towards working on opening up the sacral and the womb space in women, and the connection of the lunar phases with that. So our connection with the moon and the menses. Also an herbalist, somatic practitioner. I think it's really beautiful because both of us like to take a whole picture approach to the body to find the root of causes of dysfunction in the system. I think that's all I'll say for now because I do a lot of things. I'm a primal movement coach, all of that. So it's like I could roll out the scroll, but essentially, I like to say my passion and the vocation of my work is to bring the ritual into everyday life. So, yeah.
Mm, gorgeous. I'm here for that too, and everything that you shared. So, with 2025 in mind, what do you feel is the most important theme for our viewers to be tuning into? And what do you feel most passionate about sharing today?
Mm. So we were just talking about this before we came on. I think in the midst where everything can kind of like be very shiny and be very much in the light, it's important to touch the shadows. And so when we're talking about the dynamic of the masculine and feminine, I think it's really important to highlight the idea that conflict doesn't have to mean disconnection. And so Cameron and I were just moving through something yesterday and this morning, and it's just really alive right now. And so it's really brought to light, both of our works. He works with men and women, but he's kind of been moving towards like working with the masculine. And something that's really important to us is how, even though we're working individually with the masculine and feminine, how can that come together in a way that's co-creative? And oftentimes, there is this sensation or feeling of us being afraid to bring our shadows into connection or bringing dysfunction or discord into connection because of a fear. I think for a lot of people, I'll speak for women, but abandonment and rejection is like an overflowing theme. And so, how to communicate that effectively and make sure both parties are heard in a way that they're being seen and witnessed in the aspects of who they are and how we can come together in that and understand on a deeper level.
Yeah, I love that. And I also would just say I like the word messiness a lot
Yeah.
here because yeah, I just like even working at a spiritual supply store, I like when people hear the word shadow or dysfunction and then the way even people think about like I guess we could say like what do they call it? Pathologizing things. Like
Mhm.
people might hear that when she says it. I know it's not what she means at all, but it's like people might hear that and just like messiness just feels good to me actually to
Mm.
like speak of messiness in like a
Mhm.
bright light, or like even how like when we work with people in their bodies, they're like, am I doing this exercise right?
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, like let it be a little messy because you
Mhm.
might not actually have it all together already. And so actually having it all together can be really helpful. You can really find everything together in the messiness,
Mhm.
right? Or without the messiness, everything can't fully come together. And I also think that it's really important to speak to that, especially in a world where emotions have been made to be problematic,
Yeah.
right? So like even if I would talk to someone, especially like women, right, and they're talking about their emotions, they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry." I'm like, I'll be talking to somebody on Zoom, and they're like, "I'm sorry that I'm crying." I'm like, "No, it's
Yeah.
all good." Like we need that, and
Mhm.
especially not only do we need that, I would even say I need that.
Yeah.
I need to remember that it's okay to be messy, right? Even though I'm like, I got you, baby.
Yeah.
Everything's all good. I'm fine, right? And it's like, am I really fine? Like,
Mhm.
or am I just not allowing my messiness to be brought up because of what the masculine is supposed to
Mhm.
be, right? Even though I still abide by that in a lot of ways, there's still wiggle room, and there's still a way in which I'm like, I have it all together, which includes that I'm messy.
Mhm.
'Cause I think there is this idea of the masculine of like they are the provider, they are the protector, they are the ones who are asserting and dominant in connection. And I think oftentimes there is this expectation that comes from women for them to be that thing. And so I've noticed in the collective, there is a lot of spaces where men don't feel like they're able to actually show up in their emotions and be held in those emotions because of this idea of who they're supposed to be. And so that can oftentimes cause discord in connection because then they're not feeling, or I'll just speak personally in our connection, they're not feeling like there's space for their emotions to be in the mix. And so I think it's really important too, is the feminine, because something, we hear a lot about the patriarchy. And this idea of like women are being smothered by the patriarchy, and what I'm noticing is that oftentimes we're taking on a very masculine role where I'm all for I was gonna say for like women
Pussy
and pussy
power.
power, for like women empowerment. But what I'm noticing is, and what I've noticed in myself is, we will take on this role of like being empowered and taking authority and being very forthright in the way that we are approaching our energy in spaces. And we're taking on a masculine connotation, and we're not allowing the masculine to do their job or do what their role is in the dynamic of the masculine and feminine. So then we're taking on both properties, and that often leads to being over masculinated as a woman. And so something for me that definitely is alive, my Cancer rising, I used to not cry because in my family dynamic crying was weakness. And so I did not allow myself to cry a lot. And when I became in connection with Cameron, he was like, just cry about it. Just cry about it. And like, I was like, I don't know. Am I allowed to cry about this? I don't know. And so, like, even allowing my masculine walls to come down and to know that it was safe to allow him to hold me in that space actually allowed me to be in my feminine where I could receive more. And my relationship with surrender is deepening and changing every day because of Cameron and my allowance of letting him be in his masculine so that way I can be in my feminine in a deeper, more potent way. And I think too, it's like when I think about the feminine, we do live in a society where it is very fast paced and it is very masculine. And so oftentimes we're trying to adapt to that. And we forget that we don't operate on the same rhythm as society. It's a circadian rhythm, it's this 24-hour clock. And as women, we operate on an infradian rhythm, which is like a 4-week cycle where we're experiencing all of these highs and lows. One of my teachers was talking about how when they actually were doing studies, back in the early 1900s for like the workday and things like that, women weren't included in the studies because it was too expensive, because we had different hormones, and so it was too expensive to have us there. And so something that's happening is we're trying to operate in this 24-hour clock, and we're not giving ourselves the opportunity to be that slow, methodical process that is the feminine. And so being with Cameron has been a really beautiful container to kind of open my eyes and allow me to be deeper in my work in that way. So
And even what I'm hearing in that too is making me feel like it's like I want to like change the word messy now,
Yeah.
or like go beyond that, right? Because it's like first it's like these things might seem messy, but actually they're organized intelligently, right? But first we have to be like there is messiness in that experience, in that process, at least at minimum based off the context that we're in, or the container that we're in. And beyond that, this actually does make sense, and it's not messy. And not allowing the messiness is what actually makes things messy in and of itself.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's almost like we need permission to be messy, because everything's so orderly in society that this idea of being messy is that we're doing something wrong. And so speaking to the feminine, that is like an overarching theme where it's like we're hysterical, or we're too much, we're too this, we're too that. And so that idea of being messy oftentimes is connected to this feeling of we will be abandoned in our messiness if we allow all of those raw spaces to be seen. And so that's why I think we both think it's so important for this understanding of the deeper qualities of the masculine and feminine is important, because then it allows everyone to have their role and understand that those roles are important, because it is a direct mimic of nature, where there is this dualistic nature. There is not all light, there is not all dark, there is not all feminine, there is not all masculine. That synergy needs to exist in order for balance to be maintained.
Yeah. So. And I would even say like the masculine, like it's like, you know, it's like sometimes that like feeling of I want to be strong, like forgetting that, you know, trees are the best example of this, that they are allowed to sway. And in my work with men, most of the people that I've worked with specifically has been with herbs and like working with like sexual health, right? And so how like even this idea that I am a man and I'm like when it makes people like become rigid, what it actually does is it creates so much tension that they get messy, right? Especially when we talk about like premature ejaculation, or even like, and I always, when I work with men, I'm always corresponding like the ability to hold, right? It's like, if I'm about to feel your orgasm, this is the same as me about to feel you expressing your emotions in any way you'd like to. Can I hold that? Right. And if I stay so rigid, then what actually happens is I become messy. And then what happens in that energy, right? So many things happen in that energy. So just like, especially with men, it's like it always has to be like very practical. They're like, oh, I'm not gonna ejaculate fast. Okay, I'm down to like, you know, think about it as like holding, like I'm down to think about it as like holding differently now my woman or my emotions. And I think that's really important too to bring in the conversation, because it's something that we don't talk about a lot.
Okay, so all of this is so brilliant and so genius and so important, I think. And especially after having so much action for the past few years of the nodal axis of like Aries, Libra, and then before that, Taurus, Scorpio, we've been really active in our Venus, Mars counterparts and like learning about the dance between masculine and feminine. But you brought in something that I'm really hearing in a few different ways the importance of the North Node Pisces, South Node Virgo axis around containment, because Saturn's also in Pisces, but then also like this forgiveness, this shifting of thought forms with that Mercury hosting the South Node. So that's been really on my mind. And I'm curious if you feel like this year and beyond there will just kind of be more of a conversation about these things, because Jupiter and Mercury are two planets that are going to be so elevated with these transits that it almost seems like we'll get to have a conversation finally about all of the things that have been playing out, especially in relationship to masculine and feminine. And it's happening here right now. And I know it happens in a lot of private spaces, but it doesn't often happen in very public spaces. So I'm curious how you feel like that might be influential for the next coming years.
Yeah, it has to happen. Now I wouldn't even. It's like like you were saying, it's happening, right? And even like I would say, it has to happen because what you're saying is moving through me too, right? And since it's moving through me, I specifically, especially when I work at this spiritual supply store, I'm always talking about these things, right? At minimum to normalize, or we could say thinking about the South Node in Virgo and how when we say something is supposed to be a certain way, or we project like the organization of how reality says the feminine should be or the masculine should be, and how our emotional identities have attached to that. We're starting to reorganize that. And if we can reorganize that, then moving forward into Pisces with Saturn being there, we can start to restructure how we allow ourselves to flow and allow our identity to move in that way, in a more profound and prominent way where it actually both exists, right? Or even saying the structure includes flow. Yeah.
I keep hearing simplicity in the ritual of being in the masculine and feminine, like the simplifying of the structures, because there's so much congestion with everything. And I think there's so much, everything is so loud right now in the collective space, that there is this call to come back to the simpler structures for communication to be able to flourish in a more beautiful and potent way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in the more that we can change the conversation or bring the conversation up, the more the overarching themes or the ideologies can start to shift. And it is time for that now, because, you know, for me, it's been like the play of masculine and feminine and figuring that out. But in the consensus reality, it's been the war of it, actually. So how can we start to move away from that warring, or even my dynamic play of it, or our dynamic play of it, and then move that towards more conversations to move it forward?
And notice that a lot of people, like you mentioned, it's all of that fear around being vulnerable. Like, am I allowed to cry? Am I allowed to just say what's real? Am I allowed to be messy? What would you say are some really good kind of introductory questions that say maybe people are in relationships or even in relationship with themselves, and learning about that flow of masculine and feminine? But what would you say are good, I guess, conversation starters or just points of inquiry that can open it up in a really safe way?
Yeah, I feel like when it comes to like an individual platform, it's the question I always like to ask in those situations is, whose voice is this? Because I think oftentimes we will take the voices that we hear in our head as our own, and they usually are a conditioned response from something that's happened in early childhood or in a past life. And we're moving and speaking from a voice that actually isn't our own voice. So that's the first question that I always have anyone ask themselves when they have like a certain fear or insecurity or resistance to moving in a new way, is whose voice is that that's actually speaking to you, would be the first question. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the question that I would have is, where do you feel that in your body?
Yeah.
Because automatically, when I'm trying to figure out where I feel that in my body, I'm being with myself rather than trying to figure something out so that I can do something with it. Right. So it brings a more feminine approach where it's like I have to actually be with it and care for it. Or even maybe I don't even have the answer. What about that? You know, it's like so often we like even have conversations and it's like, I'm going to try to find the logical, rational reason for this because that makes me right or wrong. Right. It's like I can be more right if I have a logical answer and I'm clear and I'm logical and it's as clear as the bright light of the sun. But what if we just allow ourselves to go into night and allow for multiplicity to exist? Allow for me to say something right now and then 2 minutes later I say something different. And I actually mean both because I feel both of them. And that does not always bring clarity, you know? And for me, I'm like, God forbid I'm not clear as a man, you know, especially like in this form, I'm all big and black and like strong. And so it's like, you know, all these things that like would say that I can't have multiplicity and you know, and it's all just like the projection that I've received as well. Right. But it's like just allowing myself to go into night, to go into my body and access the truths that exist and be with that. So that would be the question that I would ask.
And then even like a prompt piggybacking off of that, just like as a practice, is I really feel like this year is going to be a tonation of feel how you feel first and then think how you feel. So lead with the feeling, how you're feeling, and then allow the thoughts to follow the feeling. Because I think so oftentimes we're allowing our thoughts to dictate what our emotions are instead of just actually allowing those emotions to exist in our body, and then kind of becoming curious and investigating the feeling as a baseline. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with that, you know, inviting like a deep pause with it, with the feeling, because I feel like this year, the sound of this year is like, to me, I like hear like the chalkboard, like the nails on the chalkboard. And it's just like, everything is really loud, but also sharp in a way where you can't actually even avoid it. It's like, even if you don't go into feel your feelings, you're already feeling.
Yeah.
because there is so much to feel in the collective.
Mm-hmm.
And so also bringing a invite to piggyback off what Ashley says, like making sure you're actually being with your feelings and noticing that, and also being able to feel what the environment is bringing to you.
Yeah.
Right. Because when it comes to feeling our feelings, people will go inward, but they're not always necessarily acknowledging that I just scrolled for 2 minutes and now I've taken that in as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and even just like an invitation, I would say too, because sometimes words can be a hindrance to what we're actually feeling, or we don't have the words. And I'll speak personally, like as a Cancer rising, it's like sometimes I don't have the words for the feeling. And so something I usually invite people to do is to like keep it sensory. So like what is the color of the feeling? What is the texture of the feeling? What is the smell of the feeling? What is the taste? What is the sound? And just allow that to naturally blossom forth into the articulation of the words. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Against simplicity, because I just keep hearing like simplicity is oftentimes the most complex thing we can do for the system. And I think, we live in a world that's so it's like 2 day shipping and instant gratification that we don't actually allow the space and the time to just let the emotions naturally come through in a way that's very primal and very sensory, and we're always trying to like put a lot of words on things that can just be really really simple, and then allow the complexity to sprout forth from that.
Yeah, for me, what's coming up is I've been like really dedicated more recently to I'm in a certification program with this Budokan yoga,
Mm-hmm.
and every day, it's been really cool to like when we start the practice, we bow to the warrior, and then we like bow to the yogic qualities of the self, and so like what you're saying, like I feel like I've been carrying that a lot with me, and like allowing myself to be warrior enough to be messy and let my emotions just be whatever they are. And what you were saying about like going in and journeying with it, I have found that that is my ideal approach. However, it's my ideal approach because I have not felt comfortable and or safe enough to do it externally.
Mm.
And I find that now that I'm doing my best, doing my best to externalize it when I'm feeling messy, like it's messy. Like
Letting people know about all the mess inside.
messy. Like it really is. And like even like how I do it internally, like I'm very quiet, so people wouldn't even notice it. It was just the composed Capricorn energy. It would be, but internally it's so Gemini, it's so dramatic, it's so here and there and over there. And like to externalize that has taken so much of my warrior, because I could just be like, forget this, I'm just going to do it internally and not express that vulnerability, or that like allow that expression to move in the way that it's moving, because I'm Cameron and I'm a tree and I don't want to be messy.
Totally.
And
Yeah, it really sounds like
even
what
the
you're
fear.
used to. If you're used to being that external or sorry, internal processor versus external processor. And I don't feel like there's one right way, but it really is about being in that fluid motion. But especially in relationships, the benefit of the externalization seems really powerful. And then conversely, if you're always in that external processing, never getting that chance to go within and really see it for yourself to get almost to a deeper level. So kind of picking where do you fall on that? Like what are your natural tendencies?
So I fell on the other side of it. So that's why it's been super interesting. So even when we speak on the warrior, it's like, one of my survival states was fight. And so, when I was in a space of not feeling emotionally secure in a connection, my warrior would come out. I'm a Sag stellium too. So it's like I got a lot of heat in me. And something that I've really been working with is like knowing that the warrior isn't just knowing when to fight, it's also knowing when to put the sword down. And so when we were speaking about like that internal process, in connection, I think it's very important. I know for me, like I've been having to work through like creating a sense of emotional security within myself so I could feel safe enough to surrender my emotions to Cameron. And so that for me is a very internal process right now where it's like I'm really kind of like sifting through past experiences and how I bring those past experiences into our connection because of a trauma response. And so I've really been having to do a lot of internal diving into my womb about like, how do I derive emotional security for myself so that I'm better able to communicate ways that I can accept support from him? Because again, being so much in my masculine for most of my life, it's like I'll just do it all myself because I don't feel safe enough to allow you to hold me. And so I've really had to learn to be in my softness, um, which has been challenging and been difficult. And there's times where like I want to warrior for myself, and I have to know that that doesn't need to happen here. And so that's been a lot of my own internal processes of sifting through being my own emotional support system, but also knowing that I'm allowed to have him hold that and that I am giving him his role as the masculine by allowing him to provide that for me. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then there's the fear that can come up
Yeah.
in me, right? Of, okay, like I can hold that, right? Because I do that thing where I go in and I can dance with it, and so I can hold that, I can hold this, I can hold you. Let's just everybody, I can hold everybody. You know, it's like, and like, what happens if I do get messy?
Yeah.
Then can she actually still express those things as she moves in that direction?
Yeah.
So that brings up, because it's like in general, I think as far as expression goes, I'm pretty good at that. But when I'm like being Cameron and trying to hold in a certain type of way, if I'm messy, then does that allow her to be in her expression of the feminine, her feelings, or is she going to have to take over that space or that role that I've been diligently and attempting to be humble about holding?
Yeah. And just to
That's-
speak on, so yeah, we were moving through
Oh
something
God.
like not the early part of our relationship because he was holding me so much. He was withholding some of his own emotions and things that were actually needing to be in the space. And where now it's like coming to the forefront, it was almost this feeling of, I think I told him, like, you robbed me of the opportunity to like receive you in that and hold you in that. And me being so nurturing, it's like, I nurture all of these other people and I just want to nurture you, but you just got everything together and are holding it down, that now as they're coming to the surface, and it has been a little sharp and a little fiery, and I'm not used to that experience. It's almost like I was feeling like you didn't give me the benefit of the doubt as the feminine in this relationship to be able to receive you in that, so we could co-create together and work through that together. And so now as everything's coming to the surface, it feels very raw and very vulnerable, and it's bringing up a lot of fears and a lot of insecurities. But it's been a very beautiful and sometimes challenging experience for both of us, that I really, and again, it's this idea that discord doesn't have to mean disconnection, because you actually find deeper layers and more intimate layers in which to be with each other through the process of being uncomfortable in the space of letting those messy parts be seen and trusting that you're safe in letting those things be seen. And so that's something we've kind of been working through, that's been, I think, really important to not only our own personal development, but our development as a unit, and in the way that we're actually able to bring that to the collective in a very real and vulnerable and transparent way. Yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds like honesty, trust, bravery
Yeah.
within all of that is what it's all about. I've been married now for 11 years, and these are still the exact same things that
Yeah.
come up. They come up in this like spiral form of like, okay, I could deal with this on my own, but like, what would the opportunity be if I brought this into the space of relationship? And kind of being constantly in a discernment space about that, because not wanting to be like, I'm just gonna lay all my stuff out here for you. You're gonna have to just deal with it all once a month, because that's pretty much how it is for me. You know? And so I've had to do, that's where my internal stuff, I'm like, just go in a cave for 3 days or go find your red tent women, because that's probably what is needed in that moment. He's not going to be able to do anything for me in that space. But there are other times where it's like, I think this is, I think this is just alluding to there's not this like one size fits all strategy. It is cyclical, and it is having to be in constant conversation with yourself and with the other, but like from all of the different ways, the emotional, intuitive conversation.
And like even speaking on you saying like when you have your shed, like going into a red 10 or into a circle of women, something that like we're working on together is I think it's really important for women to know how to communicate the ways in which they need support with their masculine when we are going through these hormonal cycles. And it's also important to remember that men are also affected by these things. Mm-hmm. And so to communicate how it feels for each party and to bring in like deeper knowledge into the space of like, how can I be supported as the feminine in this process of my hormones constantly shifting, and how can I support you as the masculine as you're protecting me through this process. And then even speaking of like the spiral of life, and how we are in connection, and no matter how long we've been together, sometimes we're spiraling around to like these same things but in a different iteration. It's like that's the essence of the shadow, right? Where it's like every time we come to the shadow, the goal is to meet that shadow in a different iteration and a different space of growth, so the next time you come to it, you're at another level of the shadow. And to remember too that the shadow is the gateway into the light, because we cannot have darkness without light. Light penetrates the darkness. Yeah. And so again, like it's really important to understand like things happen in layers, and that every time we come to that new layer, we want to meet it at a different level. And so that requires communication, and it requires vulnerability, and it requires conversation around support, I think, especially, and like learning the intricacies of the menses of a woman, and also the experience of the masculine as they're there watching it happen, feeling it happen. And how can we support them through the process so it can be this cohesive thing that's happening, as opposed to a separation.
Yeah. And I think the thing that has helped most with the men that I've talked to about this topic specifically is like inviting like memes, jokes, and then also like one person I was like, hey, like have different names, like alter egos for each part of the cycle.
That's funny.
So, right. So it's like instead of it being like bad or a problem, it's like I'm Shonda today, motherfucker. It's like
Wait, what was my name? What was you had a name for me and I can't remember what it is now.
Ladarius, yeah, because she turns into
in my luteal. Look.
Yeah, she turns into a person in Memphis from the hood. So it's like, it's like, and so now it's right, exactly, and that's it, right? That's the effect of it right there, right? It's like we're laughing about that, and that's funny, and that's fine that you do that, and it's all good here too, right? I think that's a really important thing, and I would say, like, especially for most men, especially if they're not already like working with their bodies in a lot of ways, right? It's like keeping it very surface level to begin with, as the woman goes deeper into understanding that, so they can just be like very like, here's the 4 things and here's the facial expressions.
Yeah.
Or here's the, you sent me like a meme on the different parts of the cycle, and like one is like superhero, the other one's like me, or like whatever it is, it's like it's I think that's a really good strategy, right? Like me being so masculine, I'm like, oh, this is the strategy to, I think that's a really good way to approach it, to where it's like, again, it's like this was seen as messy and now this just makes sense.
Yeah, because I think a lot of conflict is oftentimes bred out of confusion or not knowing, right? And so the more you can like kind of bring light to the confusion and bring information into the conversation in a really just straightforward way and make it funny, it's really helpful for us, I think, to like make things funny, because we're both kind of smart asses and can be sarcastic.
For sure.
And so we lean into those aspects of ourselves when things can be perceivably difficult. And yeah, so it's super helpful. So yeah, I think it's also too about men and women learning how to just have conversations around where they're confused or they don't know certain things, because I think sometimes we're afraid to ask questions or we're afraid to go deeper, also because of like a fear of being misunderstood or maybe feeling stupid or feeling like you don't have the answers. And so sometimes it keeps us from crossing that boundary or crossing that bridge to find understanding.
Yeah. And I think it's really good to understand pacing too, right? Like understanding that a woman's pace is a changing pace, or a cyclical pace,
Yeah.
and the masculine's pace is going to be more
Linear,
right,
yeah.
linear. Some people might call it steady, and and like that's important, right? Because if she is going to this cycle to that cycle to this cycle that cycle, and I'm like trying to stay on pace, it's like I can stay on pace if I know her pace is changing pace.
Yeah.
But if I'm like, I'm trying to stay on pace and you're over here, it's like that's not going to work for people, and that's how people have tended to approach it. They, or like, again, they'll see it as a messy or a problem, but I'm like, oh no, that's her pace, that's her rhythm, right? So even for me, I'm like, when she starts her cycle, right, I'm like, actually it would be good for me if I stay on pace. If like we've been getting up in the morning and blah blah, and it's like that's not time for her to do that anymore. I'm gonna get up early. Actually, I'm gonna clean the dishes. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna stay on this pace so that you can stay on your pace of changing pace.
Yeah.
Ooh, I love that. I'm gonna like section out just that part and like send it to my husband. He needs to hear that part specifically.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I love you both so much. I feel like we could keep going in this conversation forever, and I have a feeling that we will in some way. Thank you for all of that.
Yeah.
So I would love for you to share what is a good way that our people can find you, how they might be able to keep working with you, or what your gift is for the people for this summit, and any lasting words that you would love to leave everyone with.
Yeah. I got it. Yeah, because I want you to be like, I want you to feel it and channel it. So for me, my Instagram is cadream6. My website is www.cadreamplan.com. It'll be, the links will be there for people, and it'll be available. And the way I've been liking working with people lately, especially, is in my mentorship container, my personal development container, which is like a 3-month process that allows people to go in, like we were talking about, going inward and like beginning to like hear the whispers of the body and listen to that, but also like, so going into the terrestrial form, but utilizing the celestial spheres to do so and making the connection between the two. So that's one big thing that has been, I've been wanting to invite people into more. And then also reminding people that with medical astrology, you don't have to wait till you have a problem or an issue to come to us. And that I'm really good at like preventative things, especially like the more I've worked with older people, like the things that people get scared of as they get older, like hip issues, knee issues, low back pain, stuff like that, and seeing it in the chart and then being able to work with them. So yeah, that's what I would say. Also, I've been getting really, really good at people with cold hands and feet. If you have cold hands and feet, reach out to me. I got your back. I got a whole process that I've been creating with that. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. My Instagram is lunar_crystalline. I don't do Facebook. My website is lunarcrystalline.com. Something that I'm really gearing things towards, I just started a new container called Primordial Weaver. And so that is working with the moon and menses through a lot of different modalities. The biggest form of that is teaching women how to work with their cycle through herbal remedies, movement, spiritual practices, and connecting it to the lunar phases so they can find a deeper understanding of our connection to the moon, to create a deeper understanding of our moon. My offering, though, to the collective is going to be medical intuitive readings. So I'm going to do like a medical intuitive reading and gear it more towards sacral activation. So, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. And I'm just so grateful for our time together. I'm so grateful for all of you watching. Please reach out to Cameron and Ashley and any of us of the Astro Priestesses if you have thoughts, feelings, questions. We would love to hear from you. And I hope you just were able to soak that in. Probably watch this again a few times. I know I'm going to. And just really pull out what is most beneficial for you and your relationships and where you're at. So thank you both again so
Thank
much.
you, Nara.